Magandang araw mga ka-aerial defense, may ibabahagi na naman ako sa inyo. Dahil ngayong araw na ito ay may pag-uusapan tayo tungkol sa depensa, carrier strike group at barkong pandigma ng Pilipinas nagsama-samang nagpatrolya sa West Philippine Sea. Pero bago tayo magpatuloy, huwag mo muna kalimutan mag-like, share and subscribe. Manatiling nakatutok sa aming channel para updated ka sa balitang militar at West Philippine Sea. Nagsagawa ng 2 araw na maritime cooperative activity ang Armed Forces of the Philippines kasama ang United States Navy, bilang bahagi ng kanilang bilateral activities sa West Philippine Sea nitong ika-17 ng Enero hanggang 18 para ipakita ang kanilang malakas na ugnayan.
Distance 700 meters, 600 meters, 760.
What's it? NSPT carrier?
Carrier, sir.
Hanggang 8 tayo, stage naman hanggang 8.
Tinawag ni AFP Chief of Staff General Romeo Bronner Jr. na isang crucial element ang naging aktibidad lalo na para sa defense cooperation ng bansa sa US. Sa pamamagitan aniya ng MCA ay magiging mas handa ang tropa ng militar ng bansa para sa mga maaaring kaharaping problema ng mga ito lalo na sa mga issue sa West Philippine Sea. Ang naging MCA ay resulta din aniya ng kanilang mutual efforts at commitment na mas paigtingin ang pagprotekta sa national interests ng parehong mga bansa. Sa hiwalay na pahayag naman ay tinawag ni Carrier Strike Group 1 Commander Rear Admiral Michael Wasji na isang collective commitment sa pagpapatibay sa kanilang regional at international na kooperasyon ang kanilang pagsuporta sa mas malaya na Indo-Pacific. Sa pamamagitan din aniya nito ay makakabuo ng mas matatag na pundasyon at relasyon ang Pilipinas at US at patuloy na matututo sa isa't isa. Samantala, isang malaking karangalan naman para sa US Navy ang naging bilateral activity, na siyang paghahanda na rin sa patuloy na pag-aligid ng monster ship ng Chinese Coast Guard vessel sa exclusive economic zone ng bansa. Sinabi ni Senador Marco Rubio, ang pinili ni US President-elect Donald Trump na mamuno sa Departamento ng Estado, na dapat itigil ng China ang pakikialam sa Pilipinas at Taiwan, na binanggit na ang mga deeply destabilized na aksyon nito sa rehiyon ay nag-uudyok sa US na kontrahin ito. Sa kanyang pagdinig sa kumpirmasyon sa harap ng US Senate Committee on Foreign Relations noong Huwebes, napanghinaan ng loob si Rubio na ang China na magsagawa ng rash or irrational pagdating sa Pilipinas o Taiwan kung seryoso itong patatagin ang US at China relationship. Nagbabala ang senador ng US na kung anumang miscommunication o ilang hindi sinasadyang salungatan ay lumitaw mula sa panggigipit ng China sa South China Sea, na kung saan ay mapipilitan ng US na ipagtanggol ang Pilipinas bilang kaalyado nito sa kasunduan, at ang epekto nito sa buong mundo ay magiging napakalaki.
Taiwan out of it for a moment and say it's the Philippines. Okay, in the last 48 hours, there's this massive, I don't even know how to describe it, but this massive ship that the Chinese have built that's like headed towards the Philippines, and the Philippines feels threatened by it, rightfully so. We've seen this on a daily basis with the harassment and so forth, but on a daily basis. If, God forbid, there is some miscommunication or some inadvertent conflict emerges there, and we have obligations to them, the impact that will have on the entire globe, the impact that it will have on the entire globe is enormous, and that includes Europe. So they have a selfish, vested interest in seeking for the Chinese to curb their behaviors. I would also point to the Europeans that what the Russians have done with Ukraine would not have been possible without the assistance of China, whether it's the sharing of technology or aid in evading sanctions or selling their oil in secondary markets. The Chinese have been hidden, but clear to everyone watching, partners in the Russian endeavor. One thing I would point to here with regards to stability. If the Chinese are in fact serious about stabilizing U.S.-China relations and finding avenues of which we can be cooperative and avoid conflict, then they will not do anything rash or irrational when it comes to Taiwan or the Philippines for that matter. The actions they are taking now are deeply destabilizing. They are forcing us to take counteractions because we have commitments to the Philippines and we have commitments to Taiwan that we intend to keep. And so if they want to destabilize the relationship, or they want to help at least create some pathway for stabilization of our relationship with them, even as we remain engaged in global competition, and in some cases more adversarial than others, they really need to stop messing around with Taiwan and with the Philippines, because it's forcing us to focus our attention in ways we prefer not to have to.
Glad you mentioned the Philippines. You know, my theory of the case here is that not that China has decided that its risk appetite is higher, but rather that the things that they are doing are not so risky at all. And that's because we have not been in a position to impose consequences. And I think one of the places where we have a good and growing partnership, and obviously bilateral economic and treaty obligations, is the Philippines. And in addition to the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, and in addition to the Luzon Corridor economic partnerships, I'm just wondering how you see that growing democracy, one of our best allies on the planet, how you see that as strategically important for the United States?
Well, I think it's important. First of all, it's always been strategically important for the United States. Obviously, our military presence there diminished greatly as a result of some of the decisions that were made within the Philippines, but now you see a willingness to see us return. Look, we're not looking to militarize the Philippines, and this is not, I think it would be a mistake to solely view it as a security arrangement. There are long ties between the United States and Philippines that date back to 1899 and the Spanish-American War. And, and so I think it's important to build on that as well. I think there are real economic opportunities that we should be exploring. And so it's one that we need to show us commitment. If I'll be frank, I think where this kind of fell off was, and I'm not getting involved in internal Filipino politics, but I'm telling you, during Duterte, it was a little tougher to work with them. And obviously there's some issue going on there internally as well. I'll leave that to their electorate and their politics to solve. So I think to the extent that over the last few years, you have seen a reinvigoration of American interests, it's not simply driven by the fact that the Chinese are harassing them. It's also driven by the fact that there's been a more welcoming attitude towards our posture and our position there. And that's one that when that opportunity presents itself, we should embrace, but then we need it to show results so that it becomes enduring. In essence, when your engagement with a country leads to economic development, whether it's outbound U.S. investment in the Philippines or what have you, then that becomes enduring. Then it makes it difficult, no matter who's in charge, to walk away from the alliance, because the alliance is more than just military and a military presence. It also involves jobs and businesses and investment and economic opportunity. And we need to look for ways to emphasize that. I think it would be a mistake to simply view it as a military or defense alliance.
Deployed ships to the South China Sea to harass our allies like the Philippines in their own territorial waters. The People's Republic of China is the head of the stake of this axis of dictators that are challenging the United States today. They are challenging our freedom, our security, and the very way of life we have. Beijing has had a direct hand in each of the problems I just mentioned. That's why addressing any one of them cannot be done without making sure that we are thinking about how we are deterring the People's Republic of China. When everything is a priority, nothing's a priority. And Senator Rubio, your top priority must be the People's Republic of China.
The Communist Party of China leads the PRC, is the most potent and dangerous near-peer adversary this nation has ever confronted. They have elements that the Soviet Union never possessed. They are a technological adversary and competitor, an industrial competitor, an economic competitor, a geopolitical competitor, a scientific competitor now, in every realm. It's an extraordinary challenge. It's one that I believe will define the 21st century. When they write the book about the 21st century, there's going to be some chapters in there about Putin, there's going to be some chapters in there about some of these other places, but the bulk of that book about the 21st century will be not just about China, but about the relationship between China and the United States and what direction it went. And I think you're alluding to it in your statement. I know you may have another question. I don't want to eat up all your time, but I do want to say this. The Chinese believe that the United States are a great power in inevitable decline and that they are an inevitable rise. Now they already are. They're going to be a rich and powerful country, and we're going to have to deal with them. The danger is that because of our own actions, in many cases, a dangerous imbalance is built up in that relationship. We allowed them for years to pretend that they were some developing countries, so we should allow them to continue to cheat on trade and commerce. We should allow them to continue to expand. They lied about not militarizing and populating island chains in the South China Sea and the like. We allowed them for years before we got serious about it to conduct grotesque human rights violations against Uyghur Muslims, as an example. One of the most horrifying things happening on the planet. And for years, no one talked about it, which, by the way, not just has a human rights component to it, it allows them to use slave labor to produce goods at the expense of the rest of the world. Talk about not just a horrific humanitarian crisis, but an unfair trade practice as well. We've allowed them to get away with things. And frankly, the Chinese did what any country in the world would do given these opportunities. They took advantage of it. And so I think now we're dealing with the ramifications of it. I agree 100% what you said, but I remind you, and I remind everyone, I guess I want to make this point, that much of what we need to do to confront China is here at home. It's not just abroad, it's also here at home. We have to rebuild our domestic industrial capacity, and we have to make sure that the United States is not reliant on any single other nation for any of our critical supply chain.
Para sa mas madaming update tungkol sa ating depensa, paki-follow at like muna ng aming page na nasa description na ang link. Huwag mo na rin kalimutan mag-like, share and subscribe. Pindutin mo na rin ang bell para updated kayo sa aking mga bagong video. Maraming salamat po.